Hello Internet, I'm Zahn, and welcome back to another tier list video. I had mentioned this over on Twitter not too long ago, but today for the video focus, it's going to be a big one. And I think this is going to be a series of videos rather than just one single session because there's a lot to cover. So before we get into it, sort of intro this particular one, I've mentioned it on numerous videos on my channel that my favorite video game series of all time is Monster Hunter. I've been playing the video games in the series since Freedom Unite on the PSP, and overall it's a series that's very near and dear to my heart. So looking on Tier Maker, I was able to find this tier list. If we scroll down, the credit goes to user TotoAfrica8, which is a great username. And this person has created a tier list of all of the main series monsters in Monster Hunter so far, and it includes subspecies, rare species, variants, and deviants, which were unique to Generations and Generations Ultimate. And what I'd like to do for the sake of the video is go through and rank all the monsters in this tier list. But I want to set some ground rules, since I don't think I'm the first person to do something like this for Monster Hunter. I want to rate the monsters on specific parameters that are going to be a little bit unique to this particular tier list. And what I can do is I can put the rules on screen here. If I can format this video in a way to have them under the video, or maybe they'll be off to the side somewhere. The rules for ranking the monsters are as follows. Rule number 1, the monsters are ranked purely on design and fight. And what I mean by that is based on their appearance, their attributes to their overall creature design, and what it's like to fight them when you're on a hunt in Monster Hunter. This tier list does not take into account the power or strength of the gear that you get from the creatures. If I were to do a tier list based on that, it would look very different because certain monsters obviously have better skills they impart than others, and also because the skill system has changed between old school Monster Hunter and the current generation like World and Iceborne, there wouldn't really be an easy way to rate monsters that appear in both the old and new series based on their skill loadouts, so I don't want to do that here. The main two parameters will purely be based on aesthetic, design, and the encounter with the monster itself. Now, those are the only two parameters that I'm going to be following for this one. And I feel like I need a disclaimer any video I make like this for the tier lists. This is purely based on my opinion. Obviously, everybody who plays these video games and has encountered these different creatures is going to feel differently. And what I encourage people to do, if they see this video, would be to go onto Tier Maker, pull up this list from the user that I mentioned down below, and make your own tier lists. I would love to see what other people that are familiar with the series think about the giant library of creatures. So by all means, feel free to go and create your own tier lists and send them to me over on Twitter. We'll go ahead and get started. This doesn't look like it's in a particular order. It's not alphabetical, but it does seem like this person has grouped the monsters together in similar sets. So if a monster has a set of subspecies or subspecies and rare species, and I'll explain what that means. They're sort of lumped together, but it's not in any alphabetical order, so we'll take it from the top. And before I start talking about the monsters, I have on my other screen here, I have the Monster Hunter wiki pulled up because I may have to look up the names for some of these ones that have been in older games that I haven't played in a while. I'm going to do my best to try and remember all of them, but if we scroll down through the list here, there's a ton of monsters that have been in the series. This will most likely be several installments, but hopefully it'll be interesting to hear me talk about the history and what I think about all these things. So let's go ahead and get started. The tier lists run from S tier being the best to F tier. I added an F tier because there will be F tier monsters on here. And then the bottom tier is ones I haven't hunted yet. A previous tier list I was looking at had other monsters, including small ones, which I had separated out. But of the current series of games, only ones I haven't fought are the Leshens from the Witcher DLC. I haven't finished those quests yet, so I can't really rate them. So if I come across anything else that I've never fought, I think there might be a couple, like I could pull Bloodbath Diablos out. That deviant from Generations Ultimate I haven't hunted yet. I haven't gotten far enough to unlock it in the game. But if we run across any other ones in the list here that I haven't fought, I will put them into this separate list, tier list down here, separate tier, and they'll be in a spot of their own. First up, we have Great Gyros. This one from Monster Hunter World and Iceborne is considered a large monster, but it's from the quote-unquote Great Blank series. They're four-legged monsters that sort of serve as intermediate targets. The hunts themselves aren't too bad. The Great Gyros is interesting in that it lives in the Rotten Vale and roves in packs with regular Gyros, and it can call them to attack, and its bite inflicts paralysis, and it can be pretty annoying to deal with, but I do like its design. It's sort of this dark skinned cobra creature with this patterning on it. Overall, I would put this one at high C tier. I like Great Gyros. Again, if we're going by gear, it may rank differently because of the skills, but based on the fight and the appearance, I think it's right in the middle. I'd say high average. C+ is where I'd put Great Gyros. Not a bad monster, both in design and fight. Next up, we have another newcomer from the current generation. We have Tobi Kadachi, the Thunder Element flying fox squirrel lizard. I like Tobi. Tobi is an early game target in World, and overall it's not terribly difficult, and it's a good introduction for newer players into a more fast, speed, agile type target. I'm going to put Tobi in B tier. Depending on how everything else shakes out, I would probably put this one near the top of B tier. Overall, it's a pretty unique design. I like its coloring, and the fight itself is pretty fun. So I'd put Tobi here. Next up, we have the first subspecies in the list, and to sort of define what a subspecies is for those who may be new to Monster Hunter. A subspecies is sort of like a cousin for the main species of a creature. It shares similar attributes to the shape and design of its other cousins, but has unique characteristics that make it different. Whether it's different element, or a different environment where it lives, or different move sets, there's something that sets it apart from the regular species. And subspecies is different from a variant. A variant, to do a real quick aside, would be something like Seething Basilgeuse. Seething Basilgeuse is not a different element. It's like a regular Basilgeuse, but it's evolved or endured certain harsh conditions that have given it unique qualities. So it's not necessarily a different element or a cousin. It's more of an evolved version of the original. And variants don't get classified as a different species, but they're still separate in that they usually get their own gear and equipment and behave differently enough to set them apart, but it's more of an evolved version of the original. And rare species only show up in certain games. Rare species would be something like Molten Tigrex down here, and there's a couple others. Rare species are sort of like a rare anomaly of a creature that evolves. They're similar to their original cousins, I guess you can call them, sort of like a subspecies, but they tend to have very strong or powerful, unique moves that make them rare, as the name would suggest. And they show up in certain games, usually in the ultimate versions of the different games of the past, but they also set themselves apart with different moves, usually a higher tier of challenge and higher rarities of gear. And then the last category would be Deviants, something like Bolt Reaver Astalos. Deviants were unique to Generations and Generations Ultimate. They were creatures that have survived. I think the lore says that they'd survived encounters with hunters, and as a result became more powerful and sort of like a variant evolved unique qualities. They tend to be similar elemental affinity to the regular versions, but much stronger and more dangerous. And as a result, they were end game tiers of targets in the Generations and Generations Ultimate. Pose a pretty decent challenge. So that's a sort of classification of how these monsters are going to fit. So if we go back up to the list here, our first subspecies would be Viper Tobi-Kadachi. And unlike the regular one up here, Viper Tobi-Kadachi doesn't have an elemental affinity, but it has several different types of ailments, or 2 different types of ailments that it can deal. Its quills and a lot of its attacks will deal a very dangerous poison, and its bite deals paralysis. When you fight this one sort of towards the beginning of Iceborne, it can be quite challenging if you can't negate its poison, because it will take your health down really fast and it's a pretty quick target. Its moveset's similar to the regular Toby, but a little bit more agile and has a tendency to want to flick poison quills all over the place, which become hazards on the... For Viper Toby, I do like its design. The fight is decent, but kind of annoying due to the status ailment. So I'm going to drop it 1 tier down below its cousin, the regular Toby, but ahead of Great Juros. We'll put this one on upper C tier for now. Overall, it's an interesting subspecies. It's not super annoying to fight, and I do like its design. The sort of copper coloring and oranges is a good contrast to the whites and blues of regular Toby. But yeah, Viper's alright. Next up, I think these first few are going to be from the recent games, then we'll start going back through the library. We have Odogaron. Odogaron, or Angry Clifford, is another newcomer that debuted in Monster Hunter World. And this one is sort of similar in classification to Toby. It's a quadrupedal type creature. Think Fanged Beast is its official classification. But this one has a really unique design. As its nickname suggests, it's got this really rough sort of fleshy texture on its body. It's a dark red. And it has 2 sets of claws on its hands and legs. One set that are normally out, and then when you make it angry, it flips out another set, and it's a very fast, spastic monster. The fight with it requires you to be very, very careful and attentive to all of its different attacks, because they can deal bleed when it's in rage mode. Between its really unique design and its fight, I would put Odogaron up an A tier. It was one of my favorites to come out in the most recent generation, just because it was very unique. It was a challenge to fight, and overall, its gear looks really cool. Gear is not a factor here, but the aesthetic design for Odogaron, between all the things you can craft from it, and overall its look, I think rate pretty highly. So I'm going to put Odo up here on A. Next up, we have its subspecies, Ebony Odogaron. This one is a dragon element subspecies of the main one, which doesn't have an innate element on it. And Ebony behaves very similarly. It has a bit more projectile based attacks it does because it breathes dragon element blasts. Overall, its design is interesting. It's a different sort of darker purple off color shade to contrast with the red of the vanilla Odogaron. But the fight is a bit more annoying for this one, sort of like in Viper Toby's case. I do think Ebony Odogaron's a cool subspecies, but I wouldn't rate it as highly as the original since it's not quite as memorable in my opinion. So I think I would put Ebony probably behind Toby in the list and ahead of Great Juros. And I rank them this way because I like the coloring on Viper Toby better than I like the coloring on Ebony Odo. It's a cool monster, but I don't think it places quite as high as these other ones so far. Next up, we have the last monster for a little bit, looking at the list here. Well, at least till we get down here. From World and Iceborne, we have Dodogama. And Dodogama, to me, stands out in a couple different areas. But overall, I'd have to put Dodogama on S tier. It is the sort of unofficial mascot of World and Iceborne. Similar to these other ones we've covered, it is, I believe, a fanged beast type, another quadrupedal sort of reptilian creature. It inhabits the Elder's Recess and can usually be found walking around eating rocks. Sort of a roly-poly, chonky monster with a big jaw that crushes rocks and these round, unassuming eyes. And overall, I would say Dodogama's got a unique design to it. It's not the most challenging monster to fight, but it's pretty memorable, and the community absolutely loves Dodogama. That's why I say it's the unofficial mascot for World and Iceborne. I think its memorability and the fact that its fight is interesting and not annoying, and it's just sort of an adorable looking creature. I can't say I disagree with all the hype behind it being the mascot. So for those reasons, I think it stands out among some of the other Monster Hunter World and Iceborne creatures. We're going to put Dodogama up here on S tier. I don't think it would be at the absolute top of S tier, because that's reserved for what I think are my favorite monsters in the series, but it's definitely up there. I do like Dodogama a lot. The rule is that you can never kill them when you hunt them. You have to capture them every time. It's an official rule. Alright. Next up, we have first monster from the older games. We have Gormagala. Gormagala is the flagship of Monster Hunter 4, I believe. I have to remember when my flagship monsters came out in what games. So I think 4U was Seregios down here. I may have to look that up at some point, but Gormagala is a flagship monster. I'm pretty sure it's from 4. But this one I'm also putting up at S tier. It's going to go ahead of Dodogama. Gormagala is technically an uncategorized wyvern. It's question mark type when you run into it in the game. But this thing is very interesting. It has this jet black design and a bunch of features that make it sort of resemble a xenomorph from the Alien franchise. And its body type, I guess, would be the Elder Dragon type skeleton. It's got 4 legs and 2 wings. And it also carries the mysterious frenzy virus ailment, which is unique to the Magalas. And in the storyline for Monster Hunter 4, you're basically tracking down this thing, which is the antagonist for the story mode in those games. And overall, it's a super interesting creature. It's tough to fight. It's definitely not a pushover. And the whole story mode sort of culminates with you tracking this thing down and fighting it in different incarnations. And overall, I think it's a very memorable design and a very memorable fight, which is why I put Gormagala on S tier. It's a pretty popular one in the community. Next up is the first variant in the series. I guess I could double check on the wiki just to make sure, but this is Chaotic Gormagala. Alright, according to the wiki, Chaotic Gore isn't technically considered a variant. It's for Chaotic Gormagala, it's basically a regular Gormagala that's in between stages of evolution. The regular Gormagala has a quote-unquote adult form, which we'll get to further down the list. But before it fully evolves into what becomes the Shagaru Magala, it's sort of in between. And when it's interrupted in the process of molting or evolving into its next form, it's got this sort of in-between version, which is Chaotic Gore. And as a result, it's a different fight. Chaotic Gore behaves differently from the regular version, and it behaves differently from its evolved form. Overall, it's interesting. It's basically this sort of stuck-in-the-middle version that has physical attributes of both and attacks from both. And it's pretty decently difficult, too. Chaotic Gore shows up in 4U, I want to say. because it's got an interesting design, I would put Chaotic Gore on a B tier. I'm going to put this one a little bit further down because it's not super different from the regular Gore Magala, and it's not similar. It's sort of in between, like the description mentions, but it is interesting. There haven't been any other creatures that are sort of like this one. It's a little unique, and it creates some interesting weapons as well. I'll put Chaotic Gore here.